If they're like really kind, nice, caring, I knew right away that they would be a really good friend.
I know they're my friends because they play games with me.
That they help me and they do good things for me. I love my friends.
Write letters to them.
I always hug them. Even they always hug me. I don't know.
Once I made my mom some breakfast.
I helped my mom cook dinner and I helped my dad do the dishes.
I love Betsy's happy to see what make them cards if it's their anniversary or their birthday or Father's Day or Mother's Day. There's so much.
Cleaning up around the house.
My mom has a horse and her bench. Lots of horse. Maybe you wanted to kiss her, hug her. Well, mostly everyone I like. You'll pray for him.
Hold on. Wait, I'm not gonna sneeze yet.
Say, dog. I'm not gonna do that. I don't want to do something bad. I love because Jesus loved me.
I love that video. Well, good morning, IBC. Can I just say, it is so good to be with you this morning, dear friends that are like second family to my family. So I'm excited to be with you this morning. Speaking of excited, the Olympics started this weekend. Is anybody else excited about this? Woo-hoo! Especially the Summer Olympics. They're my fave. I think I like the Olympics not just because we're seeing these premier athletes compete at their highest level, but also because we get to hear some of the stories behind the athletes. Do you guys like that too? I love that. There was this story of an athlete way back in the 90s that struck me and I thought was applicable to our topic this week. Lee Pun-hui was a North Korean ping pong star in the early 90s. And in 1991, she was forcibly paired with her arch rival, South Korea's Hyun Jung-hwa. They became the first unified Korea team to compete in the World Table Tennis Championships, wearing the blue flag of the United Korean Peninsula. For 50 days, 24 hours a day, these enemy athletes lived together, trained together, ate together, slept in the same room. And as they would say, we shared our food and we shared our feelings. Because they initially regarded one another with great suspicion, as you might imagine. There were deep personal rivalries between them and clear culture clashes. But then one day, Lee missed practice, debilitated by hepatitis. My heart ached for her, Hyun said. I kept thinking, I hoped she would get better and do well for her country. Against all odds, the two, their friendship blossomed. The once reluctant teammates began to sing ballads about days before their peninsula divided. The pair went on to face the great wall of table tennis known as China, who had won 8 consecutive titles prior. And together, the two of them beat China, clinching the gold. We speak the same language, we said. We're the same people. We're Korean. We all had the same goal, to win. I don't know about you, but I listen to it, I'm like, I love the Olympics. That's exactly what the Olympics are supposed to do. And that's exactly how we should live. We should unite with our enemies to change the world. But if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, would you like to team up with your arch enemy and change the world? I think I'd say, I'm not an Olympian, right? See, we're in this series where we've been talking about how Jesus related to others and what we can learn about how we might change the way we relate to others in light of how he lived. We've talked about friends and we've talked about family. And last week, Craig talked about the crowds. And today we're going to hear what Jesus has to show us from his life about how we should engage with our enemies. I have to say up front that I am deeply indebted to Dr. Tim Keller, Dane Ortland in his book, Humble and Lowly, and J.R. Vassar for all I have learned on this topic. Now, when we mention enemies, I imagine some of you in this room are like me. You think, oh, good, I don't really have to pay attention because this doesn't really apply to me. I don't have enemies. Like, I like most people and most people like me. And I thought that too until recently a significant figure in my life made a decision. And it wasn't an immoral decision. It was like a right or left decision versus a right or wrong decision. But that decision, nonetheless, significantly and negatively impacted me and my family. And I was hurt. And what comes right after hurt for me is anger. And I was incensed. And my husband became angry, which made me more incensed. And so all of a sudden, I'm having invisible conversations with this person in the shower. You ever been there? And on my treadmill, and when I'm walking the dog, my neighbors are like, she's yelling at someone. This is weird. And I'll have you know, in my invisible conversations, I am eloquent, okay? I am compelling, and all of my enemies are like, I see the light, Betsy, you were right. In my invisible conversations in the shower. Now, you may think you don't have enemies, but I know you have those conversations too, don't you? Your enemies are the people who raise your blood pressure through the roof. They're the people who you seek to avoid. And when you can't avoid them, you dread to interact with them. They're the people you can't follow on social media because they drive you bananas. And they're the people who, when you watch the news and see all that's wrong with the world, you think of them and you're like, I knew I was right. They are such a mess. These are your enemies. Maybe you work with them. Maybe you live with them. Maybe you are related to one of them or were. No, we're not talking about the sermon on family, but apparently there's some overlap here. Regardless, Jesus assumed that you would have enemies, and he said how you engage with them will either fulfill or fracture the kind of community that your soul longs for and that Jesus died to create. Teaching on enemies. Now, let's be honest. What Jesus has to say about enemies that Jason just read for us is a really hard truth to swallow, is it not? Sometimes when Jesus says hard things to us, it helps us if we take a step and we look at the why. Why did he say that thing? What's his motivation behind it? And to get to the why, I think it's important that we set the context of when he says it. See, when Jesus says these words, it's in the middle of Luke 6, and it's in the context of the Sermon on the Mount. So imagine, if you will, Jesus is on top of a mountain, and crowds of people are coming to him. And not just your average everyday people, but the lame and the sick and demon-possessed. They're all coming to him, and they're pressing in on him, desperate for his healing. He's reaching out and touching them. Power is coming out of him. They're being healed. It's this messy and smelly and beautiful scene. And it's in the middle of this scene that Jesus starts to paint for his disciples the picture of his kingdom. And he says, do you want to know what my kingdom is going to be like? Listen to this. My kingdom is going to be a place where my people know, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you when you hunger, for you'll be satisfied. Blessed are you when you weep, for you'll laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and they exclude you and they insult you and they reject you for my name. What he's trying to set up here is not that his people will always be poor and broken and rejected. What he's trying to say is my people will know that in following me, that may be part of the deal. And they realize that even if they're in that place, my special mercy, my presence comes to them in a unique and comforting and powerful way. And it makes them have some kind of peace in those situations. And more importantly, dignity for others when they're in those situations. That's what my kingdom will look like. And my kingdom will look like people who know, woe to you when you are rich. Woe to you when you are well-fed. Woe to you when you laugh. The word there is actually better translated boast, when you throw it in the face of others when you win. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you. What Jesus is not saying is that, hey, when you follow me, you'll never be rich. You'll never have a full belly. What he's trying to say is people who follow me know that these things are not the center and essence, not the purpose of life, but rather accoutrements to life, that they can lose at any moment. So they don't trust in them or hope in them. And when they have them, they're not satisfied just hoarding them for themselves. They realize they've been given them in part to give and to bless others who don't have what they have. This, he's saying, is what my kingdom will look like. And can you imagine what that'll be like? I mean, men and women who live this way, they'll be free. They're free not to pursue the beautiful or the powerful. They can love everyone from all classes and stripes of society, even their enemies. Now, I don't know about you, but when Jesus says stuff like this, sometimes I'm like, man, that sounds like a pipe dream, man. I don't even know if I can see that as reality. And then I watch him live, and I watch the disciples live after him, and I realize it is possible by the God-powered life. Did you ever realize that Jesus in his earthly ministry spent a lot of time around his enemies? Not just because he had to, but because he wanted to. I mean, 3 times alone in the Gospel of Luke, we see Jesus eating with the Pharisees, men who despised him and ultimately would orchestrate his death. Now, it's not like America. In America, when we meet with someone, it can be a benign business meeting, right? Where there's no real relational, emotional component. In the Middle Eastern culture, when you eat a meal with someone, you're saying something. You're saying that you're entering into relationship with that person. To eat with his enemies said something about Jesus. He didn't just eat with the Pharisees, he ate with tax collectors, people who deliberately exploited his people. He ate with sinners who spit in the face of God's law. And if that wasn't enough, he didn't just eat with his enemies, he invited an enemy into his closest friends. In his words just before the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us that he spent all night in prayer and in choosing who his disciples are. In Luke 6:12-17, it says, Jesus went up on a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. And when morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he designated as apostle. There was Simon Peter there, and Andrew and James and John, all the boys that we knew would be there, the leaders of the church, men who would give their lives for Christ, men who would one day be called the beloved. And among those group of people, if you look at the last verse, there he is, his enemy, Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Jesus kept company with his enemies. Why? You ever wonder that? Why? You were the Son of God. You are the Son of the living God. Why would you could hang out with anybody you want. Why would you hang out with your enemies? Well, I think I got an answer to that question in a unique way in the last couple of months. In the last couple of months, my husband and I went to family camp. And as part of that experience, we get an hour a day where we get to be with just the other grown-ups. Somebody else takes our kids, hallelujah. And we get to, get into a worship service and hear some teaching. And I swear to you, it was the first day of camp. I don't know hardly anybody in the room. And we're in the middle of the teaching and I break down and ugly cry. Have you ever done something like this? It's mortifying. Like I get outside, I'm outside my body, looking at myself, watching myself ugly cry, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you are humiliating me. You need to get it together. They're all staring at you. None of these people know you, right? Like this is what's happening to me. And the reason I start to ugly cry is because over the last couple of years, my husband and I have been longing for something deeply good in our lives. We've been longing to expand our family. And we have done everything, get it together, in our spiritual and physical and financial power to try to make that a reality. And the answer from God has consistently been no. Man, my heart was doing really good on that for the first year or so. And recently, it has really been hard. I have been deeply angry, teetering on the point of bitterness. And I've started to let some lies creep in about who our God is. I've started to wonder, are you cold? Have you forgotten me? Are you stingy with your grace? And the more I have pushed away from him, because who wants to be around a God if that's what they're like? The more I've pushed away from him, I've wondered that is he perpetually disappointed in me? Maybe you think something like that about God too. Maybe you've believed some lies about the way he thinks about you. Maybe you have been stuck in a cycle of sin and you think he's counted every one of them and he's furious with you. Or worse yet, he's done with you. Maybe you think that person over there in this room, they're his favorite, I know. But I'm so far from him, he's probably forgotten my name. Maybe you think he is unmoved by your pain. But the reason I broke down at family camp is because we were taught again about the very heart of who Jesus is, who he is from his core. See, all throughout the Gospels, we learn a lot about Jesus. We learn about his family life and his prayer life and his power through his miracles. But there's only one place in the Gospels, just one place where Jesus takes the camera and turns it right to his face and he pulls the microphone close and he says, do you want to know who I am? At my very core, the essence of who I am, I'll tell you. He says in Matthew 11, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. This word gentle means kind and meek and tender. And the word humble means not arrogant or self-inflated or self-serving, but other-centered and self-giving. When Jesus talks about this word for heart means the central animating force of who he is. It's who he is in his guts. So when Jesus talks about the heart of who he is, he doesn't say, I am austere and demanding in heart. He doesn't say, I'm exalted and dignified in heart. He doesn't even say, I'm joyful and generous in heart. He says, I'm gentle and lowly in heart. And those who are best positioned to come to me are not the do-gooders and the succeeders, but the busted up and the giving up. And in the Old Testament, we see the same from the Father. When Moses goes to God and says, show me your glory, God says, okay, I will. I'll let all of my goodness pass by you, and I'll declare to you my name. And we go, what are you going to say about yourself? What name are you going to call yourself? And he doesn't. In Exodus 34, when he tells us his name, he doesn't say, I am the God who is righteous. I am the God who is all powerful. I am the God who is mighty and just. No, he says in Exodus 34, I am the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. See, it's not that God is incapable of wrath. It's that it's not his default position. His chief desire, his central motivating force of his soul is mercy and compassion. And that's why we see Jesus acting on the mountain the way he does. He sees the crowd and he has compassion on him. This word for compassion, it's the bowels, the guts of a person. He has compassion and care for those who are harassed and helpless. It causes him to heal the sick and feed the hungry and comfort the crying. As Dane Ortland says, what is his deepest anguish? The anguish of others. What drew his heart to the point of tears? The tears of others. Time and again, it is the morally disgusting, the socially reviled, the inexcusable and undeserving who do not simply receive Christ's mercy, but to whom Christ most naturally gravitates. He is, by his enemy's own testimony, the friend of sinners. And it wrecked me to remember that my pain and sin do not drive Jesus from me, but draw him to me. It makes sense then why he says in Romans 5, while we were still weak, Christ died for us. God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, while we were his enemies, Christ died for us. See, Jesus spent time around his enemies because he was drawn to them. When he saw them, his first and thousandth thought was compassion. And he wants the compassion he has for us to spill out into how we engage with our enemies. As N.T. Wright says, love is not our duty, it is our destiny. Love is the language Jesus spoke, and we are called to speak it so that we can converse with him. It is the food they eat in God's new world. We must acquire a taste for it here and now. It's the music God has written for all his creatures to sing, and we are called to learn it, to practice it now so as to be ready when the conductor lowers his baton. It's the resurrected life, and the resurrected Jesus calls us to begin living it with him and for him right now. Love is at the heart of hope, he summarizes. And those who truly hope, as the resurrection encourages us to, are people who are enabled to love in this new way. And people who love in this new way are people who are enabled to hope. See, there's something wrong out there. You're right. There's something wrong with that person you're thinking about right now. But there's something wrong in here too, isn't there? And there's something beautiful and totally transformative in him. That was the why. Now let's talk about the how. So how do we actually love our enemies? Well, Jesus tells us in Luke 6:27-28, but to you who are listening, I say, by the way, it's only for people who are listening, so don't worry. If you're not listening, this is not for you. To you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Woo! That's some hard stuff, Lord. He gives us two kinds of work to be able to get this done. First, he gives us an inner work, and then he gives us an outer work. Inner work, he tells us to pray. He commands us to pray, to pour out our vitriol, to empty ourselves of our self-righteousness, to empty ourselves of our condemnation until we can see our enemy as another image bearer of the living God who is broken by the same sin that breaks us. He says, pray. Pray until you can will their flourishing as I will yours. That is a God-only work. It's a work only God can do in you. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see Jesus, before he chooses his disciples, spend all night in prayer. Because that wasn't easy for him either. But it was the inner work of prayer that enabled him to do the good work of calling Judas. And I know he did the inner work of prayer by praying for his enemies over and over again, because how could he have prayed on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing, in that moment, if he had not done the inner work of prayer beforehand? He tells us to do the inner work of prayer, and then he tells us to do the outer work of doing good. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm like, do good? I mean, what does that technically mean? As a recovering people pleaser, I think every one of us, Craig, in this entire series have called ourselves recovering people pleasers. It's a sign of unhealth, I think. But as a recovering people pleaser, often I think doing good means like just letting it go, right? Like, it's okay, you stabbed me, I'm fine, right? Like, just let it go, it'll be all right. No, that's not doing good. If you think about that, it's not doing good to let someone continue in their sin or continue in their abuse. That's not good, not for you and not for them, right? Sometimes often doing good is confronting someone in their sin. It's working to persuade or convince them. And if necessary, doing good is causing us to restrain them, to turn them over to the authorities. Let me full stop here and say, I want to be clear. What I'm not saying is doing good means you enter back into an abusive relationship, or you enter into a situation where someone is really mentally unwell, right? Sometimes doing good in those situations where you can't and shouldn't enter in, it means finding a proxy, someone to go instead of you. I have a couple of friends who have had some abusive family members in the past, and they can't engage with them. So in fact, their husbands engage with them for them. They keep the relationship open, and they demonstrate the love of Christ through their spouse. And in some situations, I have some friends who've got some mentally unstable folks in their family, and they are clear and structured about the way they engage with them so that they do it well and don't get drawn in a way that's really unhealthy. Doing good doesn't always look like being there physically, but sometimes it does in situations that are not those. And often for Jesus, doing good meant saying the hard thing when nobody else wanted to say it. Every time he goes into those interactions with the Pharisees, do you ever notice he says things to them that make you cringe, right? He says things like, you're whitewashed tombs. You're pretty on the outside, but you're filthy on the inside. You tithe on every nickel and dime you make, but you forget the real love of justice and mercy. Your whole job is to draw people to God, and all you've done is push them away from him. Sometimes you're like, oh, Jesus, that seems so harsh. But knowing that he's done the inner work of prayer, I realize he wasn't trying to be harsh. He's not trying to get them back, right? He's saying the truth that hopefully will begin to crack open their souls and help them see, I'm missing it. I'm missing him. His desire is healing. By the way, if you don't do the inner work of prayer before you do the outer work of doing good, they're never going to listen to your words, because they'll know that you're not there for their best interest. You're there to get them back, right? Sometimes Jesus' inner work or outer work of doing good was saying the true things, and sometimes it was pushing us beyond that. I know you're listening to this and you're thinking, but hey, didn't he in this passage talk about turning the other cheek after somebody slapped him? And then basically the person's naked by the end of this passage, like clothes are coming off this guy like crazy, right? Like, doesn't that feel like Jesus is asking us to be steamrolled? No, I don't think it is, and here's why. In the Middle Eastern culture, a greeting was not a handshake as it is here in America. It's a kiss on the cheek, right? So the slapping of the cheek was not a sign of abuse. It was a rejection of relationship. And Jesus is saying, part of the doing good for you is offering peace, offering relationship, even when they've turned you down again and again. That's a hard thing to do. And the coat thing, it's him saying, yeah, sometimes that means giving generously to the point where it hurts or it's embarrassing, and they may never give back to you that way. They may never reciprocate your love, but Jesus calls you to it. You were made through him to do hard things. I think Jesus displays that last piece of doing good really well with Judas. Do you ever realize that Judas was there for like every beautiful moment of Jesus' ministry? Like he saw the walking on the water. He got to see the feeding of the 5,000. He saw every person that Jesus raised from the dead and healed. He saw that with his own 2 eyes because Jesus invited him in. And even on the night when Judas would stab him in the back, Jesus reaches over and grabs a towel and wraps it around his waist and gets on his knees and washes his filthy feet because he has compassion on him. He loves him. So you're right. Something's wrong out there. Something's wrong out there in that person, and there's something wrong in here too. But there's something beautiful and life transforming in him. What would it look like for you to follow him and do good to your enemies? I think this comes to an apex in my life, in the toughest relationship of my life. And I have permission to say this because she's watching right now. The toughest relationship in my life has historically been my relationship with my sister. No one in my life knows my buttons like my sister. And no one can send my blood pressure through the roof like my sister, right? Because she knows me. As kids, we could not have been more different. Our hobbies, our passions, our values, the music we chose, we were night and day different. And the truth is, we carried a lot of baggage from our childhood and we took it out on each other. Through our 20s, we fought bitterly. We said some really painful words that we can't take back. We avoided each other, and secretly, I think we both thought many times of giving up on each other. But in the last 10 years, my sister and I have done the hard work of leaning in. And I can't speak to her practice, but I can speak to mine. Every time I wanted to give up, every time I was done, so done with this, I could hear Jesus gently pull me into prayer. I could hear him say, come to me with all that anger. And I would just let it out. Did you hear what she said? Did you see what she did again? Are you kidding me? Do I really need to be a part of this? And I would sense him just gently and quietly, lowly whispering how his mercy had shown up in my life, just gently. Every time I wanted to walk away, I'm like, it's healthy. It is the healthy and right thing for me to do to just end this. I just need to be done. I could hear him gently, quietly reminding me how he pursued me in my own brokenness. And he would soften my heart until I could finally start asking him, and this was only a couple of years ago, God, help me hear what of the things that she's saying I need to hear and learn from. Instruct my soul through her words. Show me what it is to do good to her and love her. And man, that has really changed the game for us. We have become really good friends. And actually, it's been funny, over the last year in COVID, my sister, who has been in Chicago for 20 years, decided she was gonna move back home to Texas, get it together, and be with her family. She moved to our hometown and she put 9 offers on houses, because you know what the market's like out there, right? After 9 offers on houses, it just so happens that by God's grace, or maybe his sense of humor, the house that she finally got the accepted offer on is in our neighborhood. It's a block and a half from my house. My son gets to see her all the time. She's an intimate part of his life. The other day, I was walking over there to sit at the fire and have a glass of wine, and I texted an old friend who's known and loved us for years. And I said, guess what I'm going to do? And she texted me back, she said, Betsy, look what God has done. Jesus ends his passage by saying, love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. You may not get anything back, but your job is to do what he's calling you to do. Then your reward will be great, and you will be called children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. I think it's interesting the way Jesus plays this last part. It's kind of this beautiful juxtaposition of words that he's doing. He's setting us up. The disciples don't know it and we don't know, but he's setting us up. He's saying, if you love those who love you, what good is that for you? The sinners do that. Or if you're good to those who are good to you, what good is that for you? The sinners, that he pumps us up. He's like, that's right, the sinners, they live that way. We're not gonna live that way because we're not sinners. And then he says at the end, because God is merciful to the unkind. Yeah, that's right, the ungrateful, the sinners, and the wicked. Jesus, who's the wicked? You. You're the wicked. That's what he's trying to say in this passage. And if you don't believe it, only a few chapters later in Luke 11, he's going to call you evil to your face. If you, who are evil, know how to give your kids good gifts, remember this one? How much more so will your Father in heaven? He's trying to show you, I'm telling you to be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful, to remind you, you are a beloved child of God, even in your sin and your brokenness, and I have mercy for you. They are a beloved creation of mine. Even in their sin and their brokenness, be merciful to them as I'm merciful to you. See, there's something wrong out there, and there's something wrong in here, and there's something beautiful and redeeming in him. And if we can let him come in us in a way that transforms us by his Spirit, some of that good can start spilling out of us into those out there and start painting the picture of the community God had in mind. Maybe you're in this room and what you needed to hear this day is that God, even though you're his enemy, loves you. You needed to hear about his heart for you, that he's gentle and lowly. And maybe you're in this room and there's been somebody who's been rattling around in your brain right now. And God wanted to remind you of his heart towards you so that you can start exhibiting his heart towards them. What does it look like for you to love your enemy? Pray for them, do good to them. Let's pray. Father, this is some hard stuff, and you knew it when you said it through your Son. But we know that by your Spirit and power, it's possible. So Lord, help us do the inner work with you, and by your Spirit, help the outer work come out of us to bless them and make the world a little more like the world you died to create. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.